Welcome to the Film and Cinematography Podcast. What's up guys, I'm Alex and welcome to a new episode of the Filmmaking and Cinematography Podcast. And today, let's talk about the post-production of a film. You surely know that in the post-production you can do, let's say, whatever you want. You can even completely change the story of the film. So let's talk about some tips and tricks and also some techniques that you can use while doing the post-production. So right now I'm doing the post-production for my next film, which will be Snapping, which will be again shortly released. If you're listening to this podcast later, after the time it's going to be released, then you'll surely find the link for this in the description of this episode. But till then, I can just tell you about how the post-production is going right now. So first of all, what I'm always doing at the beginning is to create a rough cut of the edit. So just putting the clips next to each other and see how I can tell this story. So this rough cut, it's called the rough cut because it won't be like the final way the film is going to look like. Of course, if we don't think about the color grading and sound and so on, that don't show up in the rough cut. So this means that just purely the rough cut will have the story of the film told in some or another way. But of course the shots, the length of the shots, and maybe even the shots that you're going to see on the screen will definitely change when starting to do the sound design, the color grading, or maybe right in the middle of the film you just changed your story. So at first, let's see about some tips on how you can do it more efficiently. Like I said, just create a rough cut and already send it to some of your relatives, some people who worked on the project too, and see if the story is told right. If something doesn't look alright, if some shot is missing, if some shot doesn't tell the right story, then either leave it out or try to reshoot some scenes. Maybe sometimes you have forgot something, so you need to go to reshoot. And I know that is really hard and unpleasant to go and reshoot some scenes, but you don't have any other choice. Of course, the cheap version is to use stock footage, but it's not the way I personally recommend, and you should use stock footage only if the shots you need are impossible for you to take. For example, in my case, I used indeed some stock footage because the footage that I needed was in a complete other country, so it's better just to use some stock footage. Because yeah, it's really important also to take the budget of the film as cheap as possible, in my opinion. Okay, but coming back to the topic, now after you've got your rough cut, let's say you reshot some scenes and everything, and the story is told right, it's time to start on the sound design. Well, there are multiple ways on going on the sound design. You can go scene by scene, shot by shot, and see which sound you're going to need. For example, you can start your film, I don't know, with your main character. Maybe he's doing some action, and you can start sound designing that certain clip. And let's see an example. If he's eating, then you try to match the sound, the bites, the chewing, I don't know, everything that he's doing in that scene. You're going to match with sounds, and you're going to create this thing. But there is also the second way, which is my personal way, is to do them like in a random scene. Of course, this is a personal choice and it purely depends on how you're going to do. But in my opinion, at first, I usually go over the scenes that I know about the sound effects that can match perfectly. For example, in my film, there is a scene where the character goes to bed. And that scene was the first one I started with because it has a lot of rumbling, crouches, and a lot of sounds that match to that specific thing. And you might ask yourself, why did I start with a scene that is in the middle of the film? It wasn't even a really important scene, it's not the main scene, it's not the most important part, it's just a random scene in the film. And I'm doing this because from that scene on, because I know a lot of sound effects of that certain part, of that certain scene, I can then start working from that point on with L and J cuts. These cuts are really easy to make. For a L cut, you just take the audio from the first scene and make it longer to go over the second scene, and for the J cut you do the exact opposite, where the sound of the second scene starts a bit earlier. And I'm doing this because on some scenes I already certainly know what sound effects I'm going to use. From those on, I can just stretch the sound in the other scenes. And then for the other scenes that are next to, in my case, for example, the bed scene, I can just take the sound from the bed and make it longer, and maybe match it with some other sounds that can work as well in this scene. Of course, was a pretty complex explanation, but it mostly depends on your mood. For example, yeah, in that case with the bed scene, yes, I started with that scene, but then I continue with the main scene, which is the scene where the main character dies. Sorry for the spoiler, but that was the main scene, and in my opinion, the most interesting to sound design, because those scenes with a lot of actions are more interesting and require much more attention, much more sounds, maybe much more specific sounds. And then of course I took on that, and then maybe I went back to the first scenes and did there some sound design, and it is a complete random order. And then of course it is really important to be careful at the cuts between the scenes, because you're going to have, for example, in one scene you're going to have music, in the second one you might want to have another music, or maybe a whole other a silence moment or something like that. Then of course you need to be careful that the music not just fades out in the moment or is just cut there. You need to create a transition between multiple music types. For example, in my case, I searched on a music store, let's say online store, I mean stock footage website, and so I searched for some music and I found the main track, and locally that track that I searched for had multiple variants of that. So it's a violin sound and it had multiple versions of it. Some versions were much more impactful and stronger, which I of course used for the most important parts of the film. But then of course there were also the parts that are not so strong, and even in my case there were even separate files, and those I combine into the other part of the music, or of the film music. So now it's also a lot about the film music, how you sound design your film. But just coming back to the sound design, so the pure sound effects, from what I noticed is that the most complex scenes, or not just the most complex, but those which require the most sounds, so the actions have the most specific sounds, those are going to be seen in your edit that have a lot of sound effects. Again, taking the example of the scene where the character goes to bed, or a lot of rumbling and crunches and so create a really big spectrum of audio. On the other hand, in the most important scene where the character falls dead down, there's just one single sound effect, the effect of him falling down. Is that it? So it's pretty easy. Also, in my case, this is a historical film, a psychological thriller, and these kind of films don't usually require too complex sound effects, because we just want to show what the character is seeing, what the character is doing, and just to emphasize the video, because sound is half of the viewing experience. But then on the other hand, in sci-fi films, for example, you're going to have a lot of sound effects, and you need to combine them, because when having some specific sound effects for, I don't know, in my case, again with this film, although it's a thriller, there is also, I don't really want to call it a sci-fi scene, but just a remembrance scene, and I tried this to sound design it in a sci-fi style. And of course this meant a lot of sounds, glitches, and so that create the whole sound experience. But because I needed this effect multiple times, this meant that I need to change it a bit. So when sound designing this kind of stuff, when sound designing, for example, sci-fis, but with some specific sounds, for example, I don't know, you need a thunder sound, for example, for, I don't know, teleportation. It's just a basic dumb example, but anyway, then you're going to not use that over and over again, because your audience will definitely notice. And those who have a keen eye for filmmaking, or maybe a keen ear for audio, they're going to immediately notice that you reuse sound effects. So my best way of doing this is, if I found a specific effect that I'm sure that I'm going to use it over and over and over again, then one tip I can give is just to have that effect and then add some whooshes on top of it, some impacts, even some music or some other sound effects on top of it. And then when you're going to reuse it, then completely change those sound effects that are below, but still have the main sound effect, but it's not going to be noticed that you just recycle the sounds. And also, if you're going to recycle the sounds, because you can't have the, I don't know, for example, for the steps, you're not going to record hundreds of thousands of steps if the character is walking a lot. So of course you're going to reuse it, but to not make it seem that you're going to really reuse it and it's going to sound cheap, then try to remap the speed of the sound just with a few percentages. So for example, in Final Cut Pro you choose how much percent of the actual speed the clip should play at, and maybe if 100% is the normal speed, then maybe just put it on 110% or even less, but still just a bit, just to not see that you just recycle sound effects. And my best tip that I can give to any beginner or anybody who starts in the sound design, don't want to call it industry because I'm not a professional in this thing, but in the film industry, doing the edit and then starting to do the sound design, then I can say that when watching the film, you need to sound design every single action. So even if you see the character just, I don't know, biting 2 times, then you're not going to sound design just one of it. You're going to do 2 bites. Or okay, this was a bit of a not so well made example, but let's say the character just writes something and then puts his pen down, then you need to have the sound perfectly synchronized. So even if the character is writing, then don't forget about the sound where he puts his pen down. And also, when it comes to writing, you're not going to find on audio libraries the exact thing that you're going to need. So what I recommend is to use foliage. In my case, for example, I have my mic right on the table when I'm doing the sound design. And if I notice some sound that I know that I can record it directly on my table, but it's purely specific to what I need, then I just place my mic next to the action. And for again, the example with the writing, I just write the same thing that the creator is going to write, and I can guarantee you that this will be much better than to use some stock sound effects that might not synchronize perfectly. You can do this, of course, with anything, even with steps, or even the whole sound design you can do with Foley. This is how this technique is called. Continuing with the sound design, you need to make sure that what you're going to sound design sounds natural. So for example, one of my mistakes right in this film that a buddy of mine noticed is that if you're going to have footsteps, then try to make them not seem that they are too loud or too quiet. If the camera is further away from the subject, then don't make the footsteps too loud. Just a bit, just to slightly notice them is just enough for the keen ear, let's say, when hearing, let's say, the audio of the film, is going to see that you paid attention to this kind of detail, but not too loud so that you think that the mic was right there next to his feet, because it's going to seem unprofessional, because you just took some sound effects from a website and just slap it there and that's it. So be really careful at these little details, and also try to match the sounds perfectly. This can be as simple as, in my case, for example, I had the character eating a croissant, and I didn't find any stock sound effects with eating a croissant. So what I searched for some cake or some sound effects, but it didn't quite match. Of course, for somebody who doesn't quite pay attention to every single little detail, they're not going to notice it. But for somebody who will notice it, then they're going to see this as a mistake. Why is he eating? It sounds like he's eating a cake when he's eating a croissant or something else. So this means that I need to grab some croissants and start recording. Well, that's a fun part of recording foliage, when you're going also to eat something. That's cool. But anyway, Coming back to sound design, my last and my most important tip when it comes to this field of the post-production: never ever leave an empty gap in your sound. And I don't mean that you need to fill up that gap with music. So first of all, you're going to do just the sound effects. If you see the character eating, you're going to put eating sound effects. If you're going to see the character, I don't know, going to bed, then you're going to put that sound specifically to the bed when he's going to the bed, taking the cover and everything and he's putting, I don't know, his pillows and everything, and those specific sounds and nothing else. After that, what you need to do, you're going to probably see some empty gaps, and those are normal because some actions don't sound. For example, again, the example with the character going to bed. I don't know why I'm taking this example so often, but anyway, if the character is going to bed, he's going to do some sounds when he's getting into bed. But after, when he's closing his eyes, then of course there's not going to be any sound. You're not going to be to put some whooshes just for somebody closing his eyes. Those are not really important actions or actions that are going to do a lot of impact to your sound. So this means that of course those will be empty gaps, but you need to fill them up. If you're, in my personal opinion, if you're going to have some trailer, for example, or some really short and fast edit, then you should never leave an empty gap without sound design. And I usually also add a bunch of whooshes and sounds that don't quite match perfectly, but just to extend the storyline. So for a trailer of snapping, one thing I did is when the character gets up, there is a sound of him getting up, but then I transition that sound to another sound of an alarm clock ticking. This was the alarm clock didn't actually tick, but just to not leave an empty gap in that sound, I decided to put this stuff. But this is usually recommended for edits where you don't have too much time, or you just want to, or it's a fast-paced edit and you don't have every single scene for really long. And in this case, if you don't have every scene for very long, then you should probably take care of the LNJ cuts, so that you make sure that even if the viewer is seeing that scene only for 2 or 3 seconds, he's going to listen to the audio 2 seconds before, and this means that he has 5 seconds to really perceive the whole scene. Of course, this is again just an example. In 3 seconds, I think you're going to see the scene pretty well. But in the case that somebody might not have paid attention or so, then putting the sound effects on the whole duration of a video, then of course you should do this. And also about sound design, something that is really important is to check about some other sounds that don't quite really, let's say, belong there. So, and just are there to create a depth to the audio, maybe tell some story. In my case, for example, I don't want to spoil the film, but it's a really good example. There will be some shots of the thoughts of somebody, of the main character, who has done something bad in the past. That thing that he has done in the past I'm not going to really tell the action because I don't want to spoil for the movie, but he, let's say, killed people. And to really emphasize this thing in his memories, I also added, while he's staring into the camera, although the viewer might not directly understand that he's thinking about his past until he sees the next shot, but I still added 2 or 3 or even more seconds before some slight little screams in the audio. And this is just to really emphasize that he's thinking about that death, the death of people that he has caused. Of course, this is going to be furthermore cleared in the next shots and in the next scenes. But with the sound, you can just tell that little story, a few seconds story before the scene start, and it's just a little detail. All of that I've told you till now are, let's say, some little details, except of the part where you shouldn't leave any empty gaps in the audio. But those are just some little parts, but the rest are just some little things that are going to separate a beginner sound designer from a pro. So these are my post-production tips. Of course, we went like 90% of the episode on the sound design and just a bit on the video, but my personal opinion is that when it comes to the post-production, even I invest at least 90% of the time in the audio, and video is just the first, let's say 7% of the time is invested into the video, and then the last 3% are just some little tweaks and stuff here and there, maybe color grading some stuff, VFX, or I don't know. But it's just a little part that is going to be given in the post-production to the video. Of course, here I'm not including color grading, just to make this sure. This is a separate process in my personal opinion. But if you're just saying about the sound and video editing, then very little time you're going to invest in the video, and most of it I recommend to invest into audio. And this is why also this episode focused just I think 1 minute or two, something like that, when it comes to video, and everything else is just focused purely on audio. Because also, if we know that sound is half the viewing experience, when it comes to the video, that video has a lot of time to be taken in the pre-production, where you plan everything out, do the sets, do the shot list and so. And during the actual production, you're going just to invest time into video and less into audio. This is again a thing if you're not going to have a dedicated sound guy. But if you're just that guy who does everything, like a one-man production or a indie film where you have very little crew, then this means that you're going to invest a bunch of time at the beginning in the video, but the post-production still needs at least 90% of the time invested there just for the sound design, because it's going to make the difference between a beginner and a pro, and it's often going to make the difference if you're going to, let's say, be accepted at a festival, be accepted at a competition, then and not. So that's it for today, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I really hope that you learned something new. If you have any suggestions for episodes, then you can write me an email. You can find my email in the description below. But till then, have a great day. Welcome to the Film and Cinematography Podcast.